support
Sue
that.
Moroney.
Mr Chair, pleasure to rise and take a call on part 2 of the Employment Standards Legislation Bill, and it's kind of hard to take this call without starting it off with saying, well, we told you so. Because on the Select Committee, we tried very, very hard on the Labor side to convince the National Party members, and we hoped that they were talking to their minister at the time, to actually do the right thing and tighten up the provisions so that 0 hours contracts were gone from legislation. And, I think, Minister, to be fair, if that was just a small amount of distance, then we ought to have been able to have sorted it at Select Committee. It shouldn't have been reported back to the House and needing all these SOPs that were negotiated afterwards, if in fact it was just a small divide. The truth is that the things that have been subsequently agreed to make all the difference in terms of a level of job security and the ability for people to have certainty over some guaranteed hours of work. Having the provision in here to have guaranteed hours of work is no small matter for those people who have been sitting on these 0 hours contracts with no option otherwise, for them to have guaranteed hours of work that will be proportional to the hours of work that they are to be available for, is the crux of the matter. That makes all of the difference in terms of how vulnerable they are, their ability to plan, their ability to be involved in not just paid employment, but also life, because that's important as well, and their ability to be able to go to a bank and talk about their guaranteed hours of work, to talk about what their salary will definitely be as a minimum every week or every fortnight. Those things matter. They make a big difference to people's ability to be able to participate fully in society. And for the Labor Party, people being able to participate fully in their society is a very important thing. In fact, we go further than that and say that we want everyone to have access to the Kiwi dream. And certainly sitting at home, waiting for the phone to ring, because that's your only opportunity of getting any income at all that week, is not our vision for this country. And Mr Chair, in part 2 of this bill, I think that in fact, I will just say very honestly to the National Party, they are very lucky that they had Ian Lees-Galloway to be dealing with over this to help them through it. Because Ian Lees-Galloway tried that once before with the Health and Safety and Employment Bill. The government failed to take our advice on that count, and it turned into an complete and utter shambles. So perhaps they learnt something through that exercise, but I'm going to say they're very lucky that they had Ian Lees-Galloway to work through this issue with, because, of course, being the other member, being one of the other 2 members from the Labor Party on that Select Committee, I'm still in never trust a Tory category after having been done over by them once when I took them at good faith for around paid parental leave. So they're very fortunate indeed to have Ian to be dealing with. Mr Chair, the loopholes that have been used by, and I will call them lazy employers, to not actually roster work appropriately and therefore give people some certainty and some security, will be closed down by the provisions that we are recommending here for part 2. Should those lazy employers, well, that's probably been nice about them actually, because there are the lazy employers. No, sorry, I'll start from the big group. The big group are the good employers, actually, who understand that people's livelihoods and the way they earn those livelihoods is a huge part of their lives, but it is part of their lives, and they have another part of their lives as well. And most employers get that. And in fact, the fascinating thing about the Select Committee process was when employers came to do their submissions, and I've got to say, almost all the questioning was happening from the Labor Party side of the equation of those employers to find out exactly what was going on. Those employers, almost all of them told us actually they didn't need 0 hours contracts, they didn't want them. They didn't like them and they don't need them. They said what we need is the ability to have a permanent workforce for the work that we know is permanently available. We need the ability to have, Mr Chair,
Sue Moroney.
we need the ability to have fixed term contracts for the occasion when there is a particular project that we want to take on, or there's a seasonal need for increased work. And we need the ability for properly casual work. So I was going to say to deal with the peaks and troughs, but it's actually the peaks is the reality, to deal with the peaks. And that's what they said they needed. So that's the good employers. Then, and what was surprising about that, in a good way, was that the employers who were most clear about that were the employers from that home care sector that a few of my colleagues have raised already. Now, they could have been the employers that we might have expected would have needed the maximum amount of flexibility in their labour market. But what they have learnt over the years is that if they required that level of flexibility from their employees, that they ended up not being able to guarantee getting the work done, the quality work done that they needed for their clients. And so they had gone into a process with unions and were working out how to actually maximise the most guaranteed hours that they could for their workforce. And I commend them for that. But we did have the odd employer who came in, and the one that sticks in my mind, I've got to say, and perhaps it's because I did once work for them a long time in the past, and that's McDonald's, who said that they didn't use 0 hours contracts, but what they ended up describing to the Select Committee, under intense scrutiny from the Labor Party, I've got to say, was in fact that what they were using was the definition that both sides of the House have used: permanent part-time work, no fixed hours. Despite the fact that they know, that end of story. So, despite the fact that they know that their restaurants are going to be open for a certain number of hours, that they're going to be open on certain days, that there will be a minimum number of employees they need to staff those restaurants on those days and those hours that they are open for, they would not even guarantee those permanent shifts available for employees. That keeps people vulnerable. That keeps people vulnerable. Now, Mr Chair, people listening to this debate may be starting to get concerned about the complexities, about some of the amendments that have been made. I have a simple message for those people. Join a union. Join a union, and that's the best way to get job security, because it's the unions that will be able to negotiate their way around all of these issues. It is the unions that raise the 0 hours contracts at the outset so that this Parliament could deal with it. In order to get work that is decent work, that people can have certainty about, and they will know the provisions, that they'll get the good provisions negotiated into their employment agreement for availability and for cancellation of shifts, join a union. That is going to be by far and away the best way that people can make sure that this piece of legislation works for them. Mr Chair, I want to put on record that the position of the Labor Party is that we believe that this will deal with the 0 hours contracts issues because it guarantees people minimum hours of work. That is incredibly important. That will change this situation for thousands of these workers. I also want to put on record that should these lazy or unethical employers find loopholes around that the Labor Party will find those loopholes and it will close those loopholes if they ever present themselves. So that's the commitment that we give from this side of the House. Mr Chair, people might be surprised to learn the types of submissions that we heard on Part 2. They might be surprised to learn that, yes, it was the hospitality sector and some of the accommodation sector, those employees who came to see us, but it was also lawyers. We actually had a submission from a female lawyer who told us that she was on a 0 hour contract. And she described the situation with lots of law graduates looking for work, and that employers were taking advantage of that situation by using their skills and experience and the education that they had invested for themselves in. They were using their law degrees, but they weren't prepared to give them permanent hours of work, even though those permanent hours existed. Mr Chair, we have got more work to do on this.
Clayton Mitchell.